All right. Well, I finally have a guest. Are You Game, the podcast. Gentleman I've spoken to, gentleman I've had a drink with, and happy to have him with me here, making me look super pale, is the editor-in-chief of the Fourth Period, Dave Pagnotta, taking some time here during these playoff months. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm already tired and exhausted. We're not
Yeah.
even through two full rounds.
Yeah.
But Vegas can thank for the tan on that one.
All
Then
right.
off to Edmonton, then back here. I'm in Toronto now,
Okay.
waiting to see the outcome of what the heck happens in Game 4.
Yeah. All right. Well, this will go up after that, so we won't dwell on that. But I do. This is something I wanted to talk to you about for a while, Dave, and
Yeah.
that would be the whole trade deadline, and it's become big business in terms of media coverage and scrutiny and all of that. And you and your team do a great job on putting up those videos on social media, on your website as well, and feel free to shout out Dennis and the team as well. But we don't really talk a lot about the covering it and how the players feel, and that's why I always love chatting with you, is because you're familiar with some of the players personally. You're somebody who knows a little bit about their personal lives and how they're doing, and you keep in touch with some of them and you hang out with some of them, and you just cover them. But when it comes to the trade deadline, and I think we put the stat there, since they instituted the current kind of deadline day in the 80s, there's been 539 trades and 993 players moved. Obviously, more than that have been picks as well. So a lot of stuff goes into it. But when it comes to the actual covering it, first I want to talk about you and how long have you been covering the NHL, but also deadline days, like as intensely as you do now?
Really started to get into it in 08 in terms of covering the sport, and it's my first Stanley Cup final, Detroit, Pittsburgh, and
pretty good
back to backs. Those couple, yeah, it was pretty good. Had some buddies actually on both teams, so it was a little weird being the first time and trying to stay neutral and all that. But from there, it just kind of picked up and escalated afterwards in terms of trade deadline and really being engaged in it. Probably the last 10 years or so is when I really started to dip into that aspect of it and just kind of go from there. It's a lot. It's a lot of prep work. It's a lot of relationships. You're going to piss a lot of people off. You got to get through that. And you're going to piss off a lot of people you don't know either. And they'll come at you either publicly or through other channels or stuff like that to, give you the business or try to throw you off course or something like that. So, it's no secret. Everybody knows my relationships really started with the players, friends of mine and things like that. And it just kind of evolved from there with agents and GMs and AGMs and other management types and coaches and things of that nature. So it's a broad array of people that you have to stay in touch with if you want to provide as much coverage or the best coverage as you can. But also, I just do it on a regular basis because, I like a lot of these people. So
right.
Just try to keep the friendships and stuff like that going. And sometimes they give you stuff, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they point you in the right direction. Sometimes they won't. So it's a lot of different relationships that you have to build and maintain over the years. But it's also a lot of good friendships as well. So it's a lot of work. It's also
live podcast. I'm not hitting re-record. Let's keep going.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's interesting to me because, in the NBA, it's kind of widely known that, there's two insiders essentially, right? There's Adrian Wojnarowski from ESPN, and there's Shams Charania, those are the kind of from Stadium and a couple of other outlets. Yeah. And if you listen to some, they say that Shams is more so plugged into the agents, whereas Woj is more the team personnel and some of the players perhaps, but more the team personnel. Right. So you kind of try and straddle kind of both lines, or kind of try and maintain the connections and friendships with many. Is that is that normally the case with most NHL guys in your position?
Yeah.
Or do they focus more on the administrative guys and some others focus on the agents and so forth?
Some lean more in one direction than, like, if you try to keep a broad spectrum, but again, as I said, the majority of mine would come on the players and agent side.
Mhm.
The majority of others come from management and higher ups and things of that. But everybody's kind of got a good blend. It just depends on the individual. I'm not going to out anybody else by letting them know who's got more on what side, but we all know.
Mhm.
And you just kind of go from there. The biggest thing is just making sure the info is right.
Well, that's the other thing I was going to ask too, because everyone's got an agenda, right? Everyone wants a certain story out there. So how do you kind of sometimes when you're fed something or when you find out something, do you kind of snicker back to them and say, oh, okay, yeah, you just want me to put this out? Does that happen? Or do you have to kind of lead through stuff? Or
well, that happens all the time. But also, scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of thing. Don't think that these other people and on other teams and other agents and things like that aren't trying to get information themselves to help their case, whatever it may be. So if we could share a little bit on both sides, that's, a little give and take is usually the best remedy, the best medicine. But yeah, there are also some people that will call you and say, hey, I got something for you. I need this out. What do you say? And 9 times out of 10, I've done it. There've been a couple where I didn't feel comfortable in the way I was asked to report something. So I kind of laid off it and somebody else put that out, and that's fine. But you try to vet as much information as you can. And at the same time, I mean, depending on who the source is, if it's direct, then, I mean, it doesn't get better than that. But you always want to try to vet out the information and try to get other opinions and things of that nature as well. See what other people may be hearing if they're not directly tied to a specific event. So you always want to broaden things, and you want to make sure your info is as correct or accurate as possible. Especially, you mentioned NBA. There's 2 guys, and then every once in a while somebody else. Info in our sport, there's a lot more, and you just want to make sure you're getting the right info versus trying to beat the other guys and whatnot. We all talk to each other as well. So it doesn't really, it's not as beneficial to just put it out for the sake of putting it out. Now, sometimes you get lucky and you've been given a green light by a really good source to put it out well in advance of others. And you kind of roll with that. That also leads to a lot of different criticism and doubt and all that kind of stuff. But comes with the territory. You also need very, very, not just tan skin, but very, very thick skin in this. Not just, I mean, public aside, the fans and whatnot, they'll give it to you all day. You got to be able to take that. But also in industry as well, you get a lot of pushback.
The other thing too is you mentioned some of your contemporaries, and certainly there's talk to me about the seesaw of competitiveness versus good job on that one.
Yeah. Oh no, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of, you beat me to it. There's a lot of, great job that you put that out there. There's a lot of, we had no idea, and this is good info. And you kind of go from there. So there's not really, I mean, there's kind of there's definitely competitiveness. But I don't think it's at least not that I've experienced to the point of, F this guy, I'm never talking to this person again, or that, this, that, and the other. Sometimes you put out info and one of those other individuals will reach out to you and say, hey, just so you know, I've heard this, which either goes against part of what you've reported or is additional info. That kind of helps your case as well. So sometimes you can't always go out with certain things. Like I tell this to a lot of people, 90% of the stuff that I come across, you can't report. Doesn't mean you can't eventually.
So it's going to go in your book at some point, basically.
Yeah, there's a lot. there's a lot that would be very interesting if you're a hockey fan, even if you're in the game. You'd want to hear certain things, but a lot, 90 might be exaggerating, but there's a significant amount of information that I don't put out because I mean, I can't. I wouldn't. I could. I wouldn't, because then that sewers relationships and things like that. But it points you in the right direction for either that particular topic or something that coincides with it. And
have you seen like a player, or rather like an insider kind of cross that line, and then a player say, "Screw that, I'm never talking to that guy"?
Yes.
He's like, I'm just going to leave it there.
Yeah. Not gonna.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay. No. I'm not asking you to name names. It's not an inquiry, but
no,
yeah.
I wouldn't. But there are certain circumstances where, I've had players, I've had agents, and some team reps message me and say, "Hey, just a heads up. I know so and so reported this.
Yeah.
It's not right, or something about it isn't right.
Mm-hmm.
Can you put this out for us?" So now you've got two different storylines that kind of come into play here, and that's really all they need. But then it's up to the public to decide what the hell they want to believe. But most of the time, only done it once where I haven't reached out beforehand. But every other time I've reached out and said, "Hey, heads up, I was just told this." And either they're like, "Well, I'm staying firm on mine," and I said, "Okay, I'm just giving you a heads up," or "Thank you for that. Yeah, put that out. I'll follow up," and we'll kind of piggyback off each other a little bit. There's definitely, without question, the mutual respect. Some have it more than others.
Yeah.
But it's comes with the territory.
So would you say that you have bionic thumbs then? Constantly.
Oh yeah. I hate it. The month leading up to trade deadline and starting Stanley Cup final, because then you lead into draft and free agency, and that's like trade deadline 2.0 kind of thing.
Yeah.
Those three, usually it's about a 2-3 week stretch. That's another one. That's just, these things are just going nuts, and I hate it. I wish voice to text or whatever was a hell of a lot better, because it would make my life a little easier.
All right, on the player side of things, so guys get ready. Guys get told, "Oh, you might be moved at the deadline. You might not. You're on a trade bait board on this website. You're being talked about on SportsCenter here or Sportsnet Connected or whatever the case be, maybe ESPN." How does it affect the players? I guess everyone handles it differently, but how intensely are players kind of paying attention to that stuff?
They are. I mean, it's different times a year where it heightens, right? Sometimes you catch a guy totally off guard. Sometimes you catch his teammates off guard, because you may not have a relationship with that particular player that's being talked about, but you've got somebody in that dressing room and you go, "Hey, have you heard anything about this?" No. And he hasn't. What are you hearing? So, you help spill the beans, and you kind of give them a little, a bit of a heads up, so they're not totally caught off guard anymore if something does happen. And then they talk to their agent, and the agent yells at the GM and all kinds of fun stuff. But there's definitely, each guy handles things differently. Some guys, if they have a heads up already from the agent or from the team, they're a lot more comfortable. There are other instances where they don't want certain things coming out, but it does. And then that catches them off guard. Trade requests, or open to being moved, or they're being shopped and the team said they'd keep it quiet and somebody talks. And so it really depends on the scenario and the situation and the individual, because everybody is different, and it's not even a fit. Like, some guys will take it, they'll be like, "All right, whatever, it is what it is," and some guys will be a little distraught over it. There's no real middle ground when you first give them that information.
Interesting. And when they get that call, it's really funny, because if you're watching trade deadline coverage in Canada, for example, the teams are the shows are trying to get this guy on TV right away. It's like his world has either been completely changed for the better. He's going to a cup contender and he's getting out of a shitty situation, or his world is completely crumbling because he loved where he was and was building a house, and the wife's going to be upset and all that kind of stuff. Right. So, I mean, it must be just crazy behind the scenes.
It's tough. And sometimes, again, if you don't have a relationship with the player and you don't really have a good one with someone you let the agent know. Like this trade deadline, this past one, I reached out to an agent and said, "Hey, I think your guy's getting dealt." He's like, well, we haven't heard anything. I'm like, well, look into it. It's going to this team and for these picks. And he's like, all right, I'll take a look. And then less than a minute later, it's like, holy crap, you were right. Thank you for the heads up. And then he let his guy know before the team did, before it got out, before we put it out, actually. And there are a few other instances where you have to go that route. It's a little awkward if it's a phone call, but I mean, it is kind of what it is.
The other thing too is sometimes teams talk and nothing comes of it, and then months later, a year later, even sometimes things happen. I remember obviously when we chatted on TSN 690 a few years ago, and you mentioned that possibly PK Subban could be moved in Nashville. Nashville was possibly interested in him or something to that effect.
Yep.
Right. Well, it was. I'm trying to remember. It was Nashville moving off.
Nashville moving him. Yes.
Yeah. And people were like, "Oh, that's crazy." And I remember our segment ended up in the Tennessean, and the GM had to come out and deny it. It was a whole thing. And then obviously it happened a few months later.
Yeah. I had to go on, I can't remember, I think it was the ESPN local radio station or whatnot, and just get drilled. Just totally.
Sorry about that.
They gave me a heads up. They're like, listen, we're going to come at you hard on this. I'm like, okay, good, go for it. The information's right. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be more denials, but I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow. I'm saying they've actively been looking to move them.
Right.
And this happens a lot. This has happened. I think the first time that ever happened to me was when I first started doing that side of things, really getting in there. And I found out that Ottawa was trying to trade Jason Spezza. And I put it out, and they ended up moving him this summer, I think, instead of the deadline. And Brian Murray, the GM at the time, came out and said, I don't know where this guy's getting this. I don't even know who he is. Some guy on the internet and this, that, and the other. You can't believe everything. And two very reputable, established insiders reached out to me and said, hey, you actually beat us on this. Like, you're going to take the fire. You're going to have to take a lot of shots for this one. But you beat us. So good job. And that's the first time where I was like, all right, well, I guess I shouldn't take what the GMs or the other guys say too seriously. If the information is right. If you're making stuff up, well, you're an idiot. You get what you deserve. But there are a lot of different instances where teams look to move players, or at least are willing to listen on players ahead of a trade deadline, and those talks resume in the summer. Or the narrative of a player changes. We were the first ones to have, Jacob Chychrun being available officially. We found this out last summer, and that the Coyotes were now at a position where they're going, okay, we'll listen now. We're not hanging up. And then it just kind of obviously evolved, and it took a bit of time and goes from there. But there are teams that call on players. Alexis Lafreniere, I can give you that example as well. Last trade deadline, the Rangers listened. They weren't actively shopping them. I mean, that's the other thing. Sometimes you get radioed and you have to word things as properly as you can. But the agent got pissed and everybody got pissed. And I said, look, guys, I didn't say he was being shopped. I said, they've told teams they'll listen. And if you don't like it, well, too bad.
Yeah, and it'll probably be the same thing again this offseason with
and
him.
it might be the same, depending on what the hell the Rangers are going to do. But this happens a lot. And sometimes you don't want to put, certain things if it's obvious. You don't want to put certain things out there. But Patrick Laine, and before he was dealt, we were listing off some teams because we knew. And again, you got to take it's a lot of fun, but you take a lot of shots too, and whatever, you just deal with it and you keep receipts.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, let's end on the draft this year. Yeah. Obviously, Chicago got what they got. Poor Columbus. They can't catch a break. I mean, that was an organization that absolutely desperately needed, I think anyway, Connor Bedard. Obviously the Ducks too were in the mix.
Right.
Do you expect fireworks at this particular draft in terms of trades, in terms of anybody moving up in the draft, that kind of thing?
I think we'll see activity. Yeah, I think we'll see more than we did last year in Montreal. I think there's going to be some. I think Vancouver's still trying to make a lot of moves. Depending who's the GM in Calgary, That could be an interesting scenario. Depending what happens with the Leafs, that'll be an interesting scenario. There are teams that are looking to shed money and move out players. It's Erik Karlsson watch in San Jose, and it's not just going to be him, by the way. I think you might start to hear some more names out of San Jose that may surprise a few. I'd be a little surprised on Hertl because of his contract, but I mean, Kevin Labanc would love to be moved. So
that's a guy who looks like a solid depth player on a contender.
Yeah, like a very strong,
like a Killorn type, somebody who moves up and down the lineup, and
yeah. So I mean, and 1 year less on his contract, so you probably start to hear his name a little bit more out there and things like that. But there are going to be other teams that are going to be looking to make some moves. Dubois and whatever the hell the Jets are going to do with Scheifele and Hellebuck and all the I think it's going to be a very
I want to center on that one because I've been a critic of the GM Kevin Cheveldayoff for quite a while. Shifting coaches. It didn't. You go to last year, right, and didn't really do anything to bolster his blue line. Or am I thinking the year before? Because I just feel like there's failings every year by that general manager, and whatever he has on the ownership, I don't understand it. I mean, it's a rabid fan base. Your window's tight with some of those players there. I don't know. I just don't understand how he keeps getting, a free pass, especially with what Maurice has done elsewhere, right. And that's a coach that's been maligned as well. So I think I just don't get it.
Yeah, I think, first of all, they have a great relationship, Chipman and Chevy.
We know that clearly.
Yeah. But I think this is the summer where we see some significant change. They tried moving Blake Wheeler at $8.25 million cap hit. So are you going to eat half of that? And it's only 1 more year, so it's a lot more palatable. Scheifele will that'll be a hell of a trade if they pull it off. You'll get talent for talent there. Hellebuck's the tricky one. And this is a team like there's Ehlers, there's Morrissey, there's Connor, there's Perfetti. I mean, they've got a strong group. It's just a matter now of readjusting some of the other pieces on that roster. I think we'll see some interesting activity out of Winnipeg.
Yeah, well, especially after what the coach did in his, exit press conference as well.
Right.
So,
right.
You mentioned Dubois. This is a podcast that's not Montreal centric, but certainly in the case of Dubois, it's a young player who's trying to get out of his second team. That's the perception. I'm not going to say that he is because I'm not somebody who knows him or pretends to be an expert like everybody on Twitter does. What I don't understand is is the loud, extremely loud, Habs fans and other hockey fans who look at him and go, "Oh, we don't want that problem." I mean, he was a monster this year. From what I understand, he played through played through some injuries in the second half of the year that limited his production, but still young, good size, not afraid to be physical. I can play left wing or center.
Right. Exactly. Versatile.
And obviously it's a bit of a dumpster fire in Winnipeg. So why is it a big deal that he'd want to go elsewhere? I just don't understand who wouldn't want Pierre-Luc Dubois. And he came from a Columbus situation that wasn't the best either. So he seems to be a competitive guy who wants to play on a winning team. I don't see an issue with that. And if anybody was in his shoes, maybe they'd have the same opinion. And the other thing is I don't know if you reported this or others, but saying that he'd love to be with the Canadiens. He's pictures of him off season. It's his off season home. For those that don't know, it's very difficult to get superstars to come to Montreal. He's not maybe a superstar. He's a great player who could be a superstar, maybe not, maybe a good second line player, whatever the case may be. But if he wants to play here, then you make some room for a guy like that and you ship out what you need to ship out. I don't understand who wouldn't want this guy.
Right. Well, I think it just comes down to Montreal's window. When does that open? Not anytime soon. So why do you, if you're Kent Hughes,
he's 24, isn't he? 24?
He's 24. 24. He's turning 25 this summer. Next season, he'll be a UFA. Why are you going to pay a premium for a player you could sign as a free agent for nothing next summer when you're not going to be competing for a playoff spot next year? So that's kind of the mentality there. It puts Winnipeg in a very tough situation because if they want to move him to Montreal, they're not going to get a hell of a price. And every other team knows that he'd love to play in Montreal. So why would I pay extra to get 1 year of Pierre-Luc Dubois, unless I believe I can convince him this is a better environment for you to be with our team long term.
So that's the thing, is Winnipeg moving him somewhere else that's offering slightly more than the Habs or the same, and the other team going, oh shoot, we know he wants to play in Montreal. Let's just offer him way more for a long-term deal, and he'll say yes. And that I think would be the only motivation the Canadiens would look at and say, okay, well, yeah, I could wait a year and we'll be the favorites in a year. But what if somebody offers him stupid money before then? Let's do it. Let's lock him up for 4 years. He'll be 28 at the end of his deal. No trade clause, no trade clause in the final year. You know, you got Doc and Caulfield and Suzuki, and yeah, we got to find a goalie, and we have a couple of pieces on defense. Maybe by year 3 of that 4-year deal, we're in the playoffs and blah, blah, blah. And we could use somebody who's got some experience. That's kind of, and we don't have a lot of French Canadians in a market where we're always feeling like we need to have some French Canadians. So that's kind of the thinking I had, why they would be interested.
Oh, they're interested. They'd love to get this guy. But again, it's just a matter of that price tag. And if I'm another team trying to get him out of Winnipeg, I want to talk to his agent. Give me permission to see if I can work out an extension. If not, I'm not paying a high price for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nobody's getting him for 1 year. I can't obviously see that happening. No question about that. All right, Dave. Well, so what happens now? You have the playoffs. You're going to cover the Stanley Cup. Then you got obviously the draft. We saw the lottery happen in the summer. I know you got your golf tournament coming up in July as well, locally in Toronto. And do you take some time off? What happens with you in terms of the league and when you get a few weeks off?
Yeah, usually second half of July through August. But we're going to be doing some stuff with some camps and things like that, the Beauty League in Minnesota and things like that. So it'll be a bit of an on-off type of summer for me. But usually the down period is August. But we'll see how things kind of go this year. And I will probably just, sit out in the sun and have a few adults.
Work on your tan. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. There you go.
All right, Dave. And the most important question is, are you going to pay for verification on Twitter?
Well, I get chirped about this a lot because I do have the little blue check.
Oh, okay.
The only reason, and I've tried to explain this and I just gave up. I subscribe to Twitter Blue because it allows us to put out our videos that are longer than the 2-minute, 20-second limit. Now, if I could do that without the stupid check mark, I would do it, but it automatically pops up. So I just
you're writing it off.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. All right. Well, that's how we'll end this, Dave. Thanks so much for taking some time, and it was good to chat with you. Bit of a different kind of spin, less topical, more on the behind the scenes, and I think this kind of chat will live kind of for a while because it's really kind of a crazy situation. I wonder if the NHL will keep it that way, or if GMs will continue to make trades a week before the deadline, 2 weeks before the we've seen a lot of that as well. And so I'm just wondering, how it'll continue to be moving forward.
Me too. Because if it's like it was this year, that's like a month of craziness rather than a few weeks. So
yeah. All right. Well, you can follow Dave, as you can see below. And of course, the fourthperiod.com is the website as well. Thanks, Dave.